Hello everyone, and welcome to What If HMS Indomitable was sent on Force Z instead of one of the battleships. Hello everyone in chat and everything. There are some interesting points in the discussion, and honestly, already I'm seeing some stuff in the chat which I'm going to be correcting as we go on this evening because it's just outright wrong. In fact, it's completely outright wrong. So, no one worry about what I think Knight 6831 has been saying in the chat. I'm not sure what Knight's comments are, the sources are, but I know they aren't the correct ones. So, yeah, don't worry, we'll get into that. Hello, everyone. Hello, all. Hello, Twitch. Hello, YouTube. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? I do love the way Runon's saying behave, chat, behave. Now, as always, I will be on Discord after this and chatting with people on Discord. Looking forward to that. And I hope you'll enjoy tonight's discussion. Tonight's discussion is kind of interesting because usually when we talk about this subject, and Indomitable and Force Z, it's because Indomitable was the carrier assigned to them up until she had an accident in Jamaica where she was coming off loading up. Basically, the idea was that she was doing work up in the Caribbean, and then she was going to go to the Far East and work up even more while past the Force Z, and then would be able to be deployed to one of the war zones in the theatre, but also would serve deterrence role in that. And she'd take an air group with her of a decent size. And the thing is, she has an accident. She runs aground, and that lays her entering service for roughly 6 weeks. And that means that she isn't there. She isn't deployed. Instead of her being able to viable to come into November, she's pretty much January. She's pretty much late December, January that she actually comes into service. So yeah, she was the carrier assigned, far more than Ark Royal, far more than any other carrier which is often normally talked about. Indomitable was the carrier which would have gone with Force Z if the carrier had been a go with Force Z. If Indomitable hadn't had the accident she had, she would have gone. So, pretty much, when we're looking at this question, and it's an interesting one, to me, it means, well, what happens if that accident pertains to something else? If we get a more Force H style deployment of a carrier, a capital ship, well, technically, I am saying capital ship because I'm being careful, but honestly, that question kind of makes it limits in what options there are to choose for it. What happens? So it's going to be a lot of fun. Tonight, of course, is a live. It's a Naval History Live. So hello. If you're one of those people who still watches all my live videos and comments, usually with swear words, it seems, to make sure they don't become public comments. Because I've got my little cousin safe filter on here, and complains about me interacting with the chat. Honestly, we've reached the point where I'm presuming it's some sort of fun thing for you, and well, to be honest, I worry about you. But yeah, this is going to be a live, so I'm going to be interacting with the chat and I'm going to be talking away. Don't worry, no one is late. So we start off with, as is always when I do alternate histories, it will be the history up until we get to the Seamus book plug, and then it'll be the alternate history. So again, for those who don't like alternate histories but like to watch the videos, you'll find histories up till the Seamus book plug, and then after the Seamus book plug, we're going to look into the alternate history. So, we're starting off with the story of Force Z. What happens? Well, Force Z comes about because of all the things that are built up before it. It's a combination of many things. When Force Z is being deployed, it's literally what is available. Britain for years has been deterring Japan by using cruisers. and using cruisers to act as a deterrent force, because the moment you deploy a battle fleet to the Far East, the ships you deploy are the ships you have available and able to deploy, and that's it spoils the image that you could deploy the entire thundering Royal Navy if you wanted to. If you wanted to. And that deterrence is usually based on the idea of we could deploy the whole Navy if you wanted to, so you had better do what we say. You had, better treat us with that level of respect. The moment you actually deploy ships, you're kind of admitting you can't deploy any more than those ships, because you would deploy them if you could, because it's a deterrence mission against not just a major power, but we're talking the second rank navy in the world according to the treaty system, and a navy which is definitely a top 3 navy. So you're going to deploy the maximum force you can. But the thing is, war is made up of a lot of decisions and a lot of losses. It takes time for new ships to enter service, new carriers, etc. And it's even more when the new First Lord of the Admiralty, who takes over in the coalition, in the government of national unity, etc., when it is formed, is Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill, remembering his experience of the First World War, immediately calls a pause on capital ship and carrier construction to focus in on escort construction. And this is probably the worst decision he could make at that time, to do such a full thing, because it wasn't necessary, because escorts were already under construction. A lot of them. They were already been ordered. I think it's some points in some of his books, he tries to claim that he's pivotal in ordering the Flower class and Hunt class escort destroyers. He isn't. They've all been ordered before war began. They're all under construction. Some of them each even started construction. When I say started construction, I mean not just cutting steel, actually starting assembly before war even began. So, no. You can maybe claim some credit for the successive batches, but seeing as those were planned as part of the program anyway, and the preparation for a war beginning in 1942, I would say he doesn't really deserve that much credit for that. He deserves credit for the things he does do well. He deserves criticism for the things he mucks up, but this is one of the decisions he mucks up. He applies the World War I scenario when Britain had a surfeit of large ships and not enough escorts for what it found itself war-facing, to the World War II scenario where, thanks to treaty, they had a large but kind of old force of carriers and capital ships, and they were in the process of rejuvenating them, and therefore they really needed to carry on rejuvenating them. So that delays ships' entries into service. Now, why does that have an impact? Well, you then lose Courageous, following Royal Navy doctrine, so it's on them, but basically the thing is you don't have small carriers, you don't have them available, so using fleet carriers for anti-submarine warfare operations, and yes, that is part of Royal Navy doctrine, and yes, having more escorts would have helped with that and maybe prevented that, but again, that's nothing which the crash building program is going to solve, and that's nothing which is really sort of technically without a logic to it. Next loss is Glorious. Now, there is a debate as to whether or not there is some people put a debate on the idea that she's off on some sort of secret mission. If she was, you'd expect her to have more escort, because Royal Navy doctrine would suggest that she should have. And coming home quickly, again, she should have more escort, more than as Royal Navy doctrine says she should have. She should have had at least a cruiser, and should have had at least a division, if not a flotilla of destroyers. So at least 4, if not 8 destroyers, and a light cruiser or something with her. She doesn't have those. It's completely going against Royal Navy doctrine. It is completely stupid, and again, people tend to blame a captain, but honestly, you should blame the entire chain of command for that one, because, especially, I focus in on Lord Corconori, because I find a lot of his decisions to be reprehensible in this wartime. He seems to be a good officer pre-war, but the moment war begins, he seems to go to pot. But no, it's a stupid decision. And then because you don't have those, you've lost those two carriers, Courageous and Glorious, and you have delayed the entry into service of the Illustrious class and the Implacables and Unicorn, so the 7 carriers you've got under construction. I should say 6 carriers and a forward aviation and support ship, because Unicorn, of course, is not an aircraft carrier. Not an aircraft carrier. Well, then HMS Ark Royal, rather like Admiral Somerville, kind of gets worn out. And when she's hit by torpedoes, yes, those are what sink her, and you can't say that, and it's bad damage control as well, because it's the people because they've lost the people who specialize in carriers, and they've got people who don't necessarily follow the instructions for how to deal with damage control on a carrier, which is to counterflood immediately because it's so top heavy, but follow the policy which you use on other ships, which is you don't flood until you have to. The thing is, that situation is made far worse by her level of repair. And basically that's come about because she hasn't been able to be taken offline to refit. There haven't been the carriers available. So even if you'd lost Courageous and Glorious, if you hadn't paused carrier construction at the beginning of World War II, there is a goodly chance you haven't lost Ark Royal. Now the point is, it's not just carriers which have lost. You've lost cruisers, you've lost destroyers, you've lost capital ships. And all these things needing to be rebuilt. And the thing is, the cruisers being lost have meant you've drawn away cruisers from the Far East, where they've been doing the job of deterring Japan. So your presence there is lessened, which makes you look weaker. Now, Japan, of course, had many reasons for going to war when they did, but the thing is, the cruisers, the presence they've been doing, things like HMS Liverpool doing the nasty and the Asamamaro incidents, HMS Birmingham, and the Tsingtao incident in 1939. All these things had been Britain reminding Japan they were there, they were keeping an eye on things. You start withdrawing those cruisers, there's no one else really stepping up. There's no one else stepping up. And so, with them gone, and with the Royal Navy losing ships, they have less and less ships to go round. And they're drawing ships down in the Far East. And this then leads us to 1941. And there's a whole debate going on. What to deploy, where to deploy it, how to deploy it. And again, Churchill gets involved because the Royal Navy didn't want to deploy without a carrier. Oh no, they have to go because capital ships will do the job. They are still powerful messengers, and they are. As part of a combined force, as part of a total force of capabilities, carriers and capital ships like Force H are truly a powerful force that can demonstrate your strength to the enemy. But that means you need the full force. You need the mixture. It's kind of like modern discussions where people talk about sending a single ship and, array all the vast weapons of the enemy and go, you're sending this carrier and it will get sunk by them. And you go, well, it's not the carrier on its own. It's a whole battle group and the whole task force and all the things that are there. And you have to weigh up the whole forces as a whole force and its aggregate capability. And, well, again, nice way, you don't want to deploy a carrier without a capital ship as part of its force structure at this point. You also don't want to deploy a capital ship without a carrier, realistically. And they're looking around for what's available. And what they're light on historically is HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse. Prince of Wales was felt to be a bit of an unlucky ship and was honestly not as well worked up as HMS King George V. Is theoretically better worked up than Duke of York, but Duke of York is considered more lucky. Anson and Howe aren't online yet, so she's the only real option to send a modern capital ship out there. And Repulse, well, you need to send a second ship. And honestly, Repulse is the least useful of your war-viable vessels because she's able to go 30 plus knots. She's got 6 15-inch guns. She's the least modernized of the actual war-capable capital ships. She's more capable, therefore, theoretically, on a warfighting level than the R-class, even though they're battleships and they've got 2 or more 15-inch guns. But that's it. That's the limitation. And you put as many destroyers as you can on them, and you deploy them. The thing is, that's immediately admitted to the Japanese that the only ships you can send are 2 capital ships. And it's not a fully worked up force. And furthermore, instead of deploying them to Ceylon, where the Navy wants to deploy them, so they're a bit set back so they can respond to crisis, but also so on paper they link up with the 4 R-class, so it looks like you deployed 6 battleships to the Far East. And yes, they might be R-class, but still 6 battleships. And you can also link in Hermes, and there's you got 6 battleships and a carrier. That's quite scary. That's quite a scary formation. But it was important to the Australians, it was important to the Americans, that as far as Churchill was concerned, that it looked like we were burden sharing and were offensively minded to defend these territories. And so they were deployed to Singapore. That means they're going to be in the battle from the get-go. Before you get good information, before you get intelligence about what your enemy's doing, they're going to be so far forward, they're going to be straight there in the option. The equivalent, I would argue, is it's like going, well, you know what, I could pick Alexandria, or I could pick Gibraltar as my main operating base, but I'm going to go for Malta, and I'm going to try to keep operating the full fleet from Malta. That would have been an interesting choice in World War II in the Mediterranean. Singapore is similar at this point, because of the context of what you're doing. Because of the needs of what you're doing. But let's consider the ships deployed. Now, I'm going to be talking a few things through here, because I think it's always worthwhile. One of the things that's often forgotten is 57th Destroyer Division of the US Navy. They're actually part of this scenario. They don't get there, but they were deploying there. They were trying to get there. And it's a really interesting... The other what-if scenario that's been run, has proved quite popular a few times, has been what happens if Admiral Hart changes his mind earlier, and instead of having 4 destroyers with them, they have 9 destroyers with them. Does that make a big difference? I don't think it probably saves Prince of Wales, but I think the level of firepower might save Repulse. But that's a whole different discussion. We have 1 fast battleship, HMS Prince of Wales. We have a battle cruiser, Repulse. Destroyers, well, we have some assigned who don't make it. They were sent out with 4 modern destroyers. Encounter, HMS Encounter in 1934 E-class, HMS Jupiter in 1938 J-class, and the primary air defense destroyer asset. HMS Express 1934, and HMS Electra. Now, when Encounter and Jupiter are in maintenance, because, well, turbinitis happens in this period, they are replaced with Vampire, HMS Vampire of the Royal Australian Navy, and HMS Thenodore. They're 1917-1918 ships. And as said, there's HMS Stronghold, leading up for the US Destroyer Division 57, the Aldern, the John D. Edwards, the Whipple, and the Edall. Clemson class, I think they're all are. Good little flush deck destroyers, 1919, 1920 vintage. Now, the thing you might notice before we get into discussing these ships is that there's no cruiser there. There's not only no carrier, there's no cruiser there. And that's because, realistically, the Royal Navy is short on cruisers. And again, as already been pointed out in some of the chat, if Indomitable had been there, if a carrier was there, because of the way the Royal Navy is running security on carriers, there is likelihood there's at least a AA cruiser there, a Dido or something similar, maybe a C-class, but possibly a Dido. And there is more than likelihood at least another couple of destroyers there to reinforce the destroyer force. Considering most carriers in this period, when they're going around into hostile terrain, and when we look at the force which is deployed with the Eastern Fleet, you would expect another couple of destroyers at least deployed there. Usually, the Royal Navy has whatever destroyers are attached to the force. There's another pair of destroyers sitting with the carrier, so there would be a slightly larger force in this structure. I'd also, and I will point this out now, one of the reasons why Hart is not sure about deploying his destroyers to support Phillips is because Phillips doesn't have a carrier. He's worried about not having the organic air power, because they all know the methodology of how you do air defense at sea, how aircraft carriers are integrated into that. The doctrine is, the theory is fairly similar to all naval powers at this point. The application is where it differs, but the theory is fairly similar. The thing is, with a carrier, therefore, there is a possibility you not only have 2 more Royal Navy destroyers there and a cruiser, there is the possibility you have that whole other force there. So, you would probably be talking about, potentially, as many as, instead of 4 destroyers, 11 destroyers and a light cruiser. An AA cruiser. And that would be a massive increase in the escort force. Yes, the doggo was on the lap. Now, he's always a good boy. Now, the thing is, let's consider these ships. Prince of Wales has been through the battle with Bismarck. She's been damaged, but she's been brought. She's fine. She's back. She's got her guns working. She's as upgraded as she can be. She is really romping, stomping, a fairly powerful unit. Yes, she has 10 14-inch guns. Yes. By now, you all know my opinion of the 14-inch gun and its selection. But that's what they've gone with. They've gone with a 14-inch gun. And she has 10 of them. So, she's quite well armed. And, honestly, she's not too slow either. Her official top speed is, of course, 28 knots, 8.3 knots. Now, you all know that my views on officially stated top speeds. I do have quite a funny story today, which I've actually included also in the recorded video, but I'll include it in the live as well. Someone commented not long ago on a video, and they basically said, oh yeah, civilians always claiming ships are fast, and actually are. I've been in the Navy, I know this, and the speeds were this and this for our ships, and you know, that's what they could do, that was the maximum. I resisted the urge to go back to that person because I decided that if they had been in the Navy, they possibly just got themselves into trouble, so I'm going to ignore their comment. Because the speeds they gave are actually higher than the official top speeds. So they just proved my point. They had just proved my point. It's always nice when people do that. Repulse, well, there's a reason I have her called a battle space cruiser. You see, the thing is, her Repulse and Renown, when they are ordered by Jackie Fisher. And Jackie Fisher still believes speed! Everything's about speed! Jackie Fisher is Jeremy Clarkson. It's all power and speed! And the thing is, her armouring reflects that. Now, she isn't completely unmodernized. There are people who sometimes say, oh, she hadn't been modernized at all, she was this. No, she has been modernized, but last time she been modernized, it was in the early 1930s, late 1920s. It was not the modernization which HMS Renown had got. And that was partially because Renown was supposed to last in service a bit longer, but also because war had happened. Again, you have to remember the Royal Navy and the British Armed Forces were planning on not having war after 1942 because they had to have some certain planning assumptions for their funding, etc. The 10-year rule had officially ended in 1932. In practice, it ended in 1937. Which means the Royal Navy, theoretically, has 5 years to prepare for war, because their timeline is they expect war to happen in 1942. We have to be ready for then. 1939 means war happens 3 years early. (1939) means war happens 3 years early. And the thing is, the new addition to war, the strategic bomber, etc., is making sure that you can't use your shipyards the same as you used to. And what's worse is, here is another consequence of the pause of capital ships, right? Those hulls take up space. You either finish them or you scrap them. Pausing them means they take up space and you cannot use that yard space for doing things on your existing ships. Yes, some people are going to go, but they're in slips. That's true. They are. So most of them are on slips, and you wouldn't pull the ship out on the slip anyway. So that's fine. But also means you can't build a carrier or something else on those slips if you want to, or a cruiser, because they're sitting on slips. Well, if they're launched, surely that's fine. Well, yes, but then they're going to have to sit somewhere. Where are you going to sit them? And remember, they're expensive things, those hulls and engines, so you're going to need to put them somewhere safe. Probably going to sit in fitting out docks and graving docks, which means they're going to constantly be things you have to move around, and they're going to take up war space that you can use for other things. So that is your issue. That is another issue. Repulse is a good ship when she's built. She's a useful ship. She's still a useful ship at this point in the war. The point is, her top speed, official top speed, again, is 31 knots. She's a fast vessel. She's a fast asset. We work for our destroyers. They're all capable as well. So this is not an incapable force, but it is also not exactly a flush force or a fully capable force. And in many ways, I would say the absence of cruisers is even more telling. Because the fact is, capital ships are more available to be deployed than cruisers. You could say, well, they had cruisers already in the range. Wasn't there HMS Exeter out there and all these things? You're correct. But the thing is, Exeter's not with the task force. A sensible commander, a sensible strategic commander is organising things, might well go, well, hang on, we need to make this force look stronger than it is. We need to make it look more careful than it is. More capable than it is. So we need a cruiser to be deployed to it. We need this. So, there is plausible. It does have a cruiser. It does have strength. So let's use one of the cruisers which are already out there and working up, because they might as well work up with the task force. It's all fun. Next, well, we should consider the commander. Now, Sir Tom Spencer Vaughan Phillips. I'm not always his biggest fan. I'm not tend to not detract from him either, because he gets a lot of blame for things which, frankly, are perfectly normal in the Royal Navy. Because let's think about this. What had the Royal Navy done at Dunkirk? What had the Royal Navy done in Norway? What had the Royal Navy done in Greece, in Crete? At countless other occasions when the Army and the Air Force were suffering and they needed the Navy's help, and the Navy could help. The Navy went in. Because that's what they do. And the Army and the Air Force would probably do the same for the Navy. In fact, I'm sure they would have done. So, when people turn around and go, well, he shouldn't have taken his ships out, you can turn around and say the same, that Cunningham should have abandoned the forces in Crete. He wouldn't, though. It's the exact same mentality. It's the exact same thought. This man is from the destroyer mafia. That's the thing I really want to emphasize. The amount of times I see him taught as a hidebound battleship admiral. His first time serving on battleships was when he stepped aboard HMS Prince of Wales. Pretty much every single time prior to that, if you look him up, you will find out his career. And his career is not one of, how do I put this politely, of battleships. His service had been HMS Verbena, destroyer. Campbell, a destroyer. Commander of 6th Destroyer Flotilla. These are the commands he'd had. HMS Hawkins. Yes, a Hawkins class cruiser. Then he'd been Rear Admiral Home Fleet destroyers. He'd had staff roles. He'd been Deputy Chief of Naval Staff, Vice Chief of Naval Staff. His serving aboard Hawkins had been serving as flag captain of aboard HMS Hawkins for the Admiral in the Far East, so he knew the China station. He'd served on destroyers throughout the First World War. You know, that's his experience. I do tell he had served as a midshipman. He'd served aboard a battleship, but I think it was the HMS Britannia, and it was back in 1904. So yeah, he had served on a battleship before Prince of Wales, but you get the point. He's a destroyer guy. Now, he and Henderson had a fair number of bombings. Henderson, of course, being the first Rear Admiral aircraft carriers who'd been Third Sea Lord prior to and during from about 1933 to 1939 when he died. And honestly, the two of them had disagreed over some things and agreed on others. One of the things they regularly fought over was actually the performance of AA armament and how ships would work. Now, when we talk about the battle, and I will do a little bit of a chat of the battle and the air attack they take and that happens to the 4C, etc. Well, the big problem you have from that perspective is you have the two ideas of how to handle your capital ship. You see, when you're doing normal defense at sea from air attack in this period, you're supposed to have a carrier. And so let's say this is your force and this is the attackers. Now at this point, my aircraft, if I'm attacking with, doing air attack, I should be hit by fighters. They're supposed to break me up. So let's say I'm attacking a full wing. I've got 60 aircraft coming in. Something like that. Well, the point of the fighter cap coming in isn't to engage a few fighters in dogfight. If there's 60 aircraft coming in and there's 4 or 5 fighters who are prepared to dogfight, and that's my cap, then that's the worst thing for my cap to do to engage them, because if they engage the fighters, then they're dogfighting them, and those bombers move on unmolested. So basically, the cap's job is to dive through the fighters, hit the air group coming in, and break it up. Again, they're not there to engage, they're there to blast. It's called zoom and boom, because you basically zoom in, booming away. And then you get out. Some people try to rewrite that as boom and zoom, because you boom and then you zoom away, but you zoom down to boom, and you attack from above to break them up. And the idea is you break them up into squadrons or less, preferably flights, 3 or 4 aircraft, no more. And you can do that. You've got enough cap, you can do that. You can break them up. You can, especially coming down, spraying, and the machine guns, and they're attacking over there, and they see the explode. At the same point, they start to see the artillery fire from over here. And this point, I'm hitting heavy AA fire, and that's going to break me up more. That's going to explosions. So by the way, what's the really good advantage of doing this is pilots, if they're on their own, their aircraft, they think it's their aircraft damage, they're under attack, there's bombs going off around them, all sorts of booms from all the shells. They have a habit of dropping their web bombs early and going home. It's estimated during World War II by some sources that as many as a third of pilots attacking ships information did this. When they were on their own and they realized they were attacking, the firepower was getting more intense, they would literally drop their bombs and go. Now you're down to a few, and that's when, hopefully ones or twos of aircraft attacking. And at that point, the ships are engaging with their medium and light AA, and that's the stuff which can actually is actually firing to try and kill the planes. The rest has been firing to break them up. And the thing is, a ship can deal with being attacked by one or two aircraft at the same time. It can deal with that. It can try and cone torpedoes. It can do all sorts of options. It's when you're being attacked from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 directions at the same time, that's when you're in trouble. Now, the thing is, when you don't have fighters with you to do that initial breakup, you're theoretically relying on your heavy AA to do that for you. Here's where the issue comes in. How much faith do you have in your heavy AA? Phillips, going with the doctrine and the theory, and his flag captain aboard Prince Wales going with doctrine and theory, seem to have gone with, we have faith in the heavy AA, so we've got to provide it with the best support we can to make that work. Which means we have to keep the ship stable. You have to provide it with a stable firing platform. So you don't want to be zigzagging and violently moving around. You want to give the gunners the best chance to hit. Repulse, in contrast, her captain has no frigging faith in that as an idea, and he's twirling around like anything. And I will use the favourite analogy I often use for this one. So if you've ever watched Strictly Come Dancing UK, Dancing with the Stars, I think it's American, and various other things, right? So there's usually a male sports star, a youngish male sports star, usually an Olympian or a footballer or something like that, who will spend a lot of their dances with no shirt on, and the female presenter, there's always at least one female presenter, will spend their time talking about how glorious it looks, or something, like making jokes on something like that. Okay? Everything's done to try and make you focus on their torso. Because the reason is because they got no rhythm and they barely move. So they're doing everything to distract from their lower half. Everything to focus on the top. And usually what they do is they pretty much stand there while the female professional dancer who's there training twirls around them like a spinning top. Does flicks, tricks, everything. Again, to keep your eyes off the male, the celebrity they're dancing with, and on them, because they're doing amazing things, and they can do these amazing things because this person's standing strong and supporting them. You watch enough, you soon pick up on all these things. That is basically Prince of Wales and Repulse in this scenario. Prince of Wales is doing everything she's supposed to according to her doctrine. And if you're following the doctrine. But Repulse, who has enough people who served aboard Renown with Force H and etc., knows that it has connection to those things, is behaving like the ships of the Mediterranean fleet have learnt to. We don't care what doctrine says, we dodge. This is the other problem, is that zoom and boom is the Royal Navy's term, because you zoom in and boom away and then you go away. There is another tactic, which is occasionally referred to by Americans, which is boom and zoom, which is when they are avoiding the fight and they're zooming away. But if you've ever met a fairy fulmar, that's not really an option. It's not going to zoom away. It really isn't. Very fulmar, you're getting away, you're packing on as much speed as you can, good luck to you. But it's not zooming away. This is another issue. You can maybe do that in something like a Spitfire, something that actually has. You're not. So that's why it's not the fleet air arm tactic. The fleet air arm is zoom and boom. But occasionally, especially, I have fun with Fleet of Oceans and a few others who sometimes seem to get that a bit misconstrued. I'm not sure why, but they do. So, Spencer, Sir Tom Spencer Vaughan Phillips, he's not a bad admiral. Is he who I would prefer out there in the Far East? No, I'd have preferred Henderson if he'd been alive. You need a carrier and you need a carrier admiral out there, but he's also not he's not the bad choice. He is going according to doctrine, and again, if you'd had a carrier with fighters up, Prince of Wales' doctrine would probably have been quite sensible. And we'd probably be looking at going, yeah, they're making sense, and Repulse is doing what Repulse is doing, and manoeuvring independently. Yeah, so, you know, these are the realities of the situation they're in. Now, the scenario they found themselves is the exact worst scenario you could have for this force. Because, as I've again talked about Malaya before, you have good troops out there. Please do not get me wrong. I'm not saying they're bad. But the British forces have been focusing on the war fighting they've got going on. And the war fighting they've had has been concentrating in North Africa and Europe. And the commandos. So guess where most of the, what we call the A team of officers are, and even most of the B team of officers are. And the ones you have out in Malaya are increasingly the officers who are very good but have had to be sent somewhere for a rest. Code 4, they are this far away from having a full-on emotional breakdown, and frankly, they have been sent there to try and give them a chance to relax. But they're too good that you can't really send them to a posting where, frankly, it's a completely nonsensical posting and they're going to be nothing. You have to send them to somewhere that'd be useful. But you don't want to send them to an active war zone right now. You want to give them a chance to relax off. And officers who you don't want in North Africa for various reasons. Now, added to that, you have the fact that the Japanese literally have got the playbook. They literally have got the playbook that the British had wrote themselves for how to defend Malaya. And the thing was, the other thing the Japanese have realised is that A, the playbook had been written predicated on Japan not having control of Vietnam, and also having written based on them actually having equipment there, which wasn't yet there. Equipment which wasn't yet there. Think about that. There are airfields built for aircraft which have not even been built yet at this point. There are defences which haven't been established in northern Malaya because of various issues with the local landowners, the governor, all sorts of discussions had with people. Basically, the one advantage they did have was time, the affordability of local labour, and the number of engineers they had out there. They could have made some really interesting defensive positions, which their forces could have fallen back to and held, and then fallen back to as defensive positions. And there's so much debate going on about it, it doesn't happen. It honestly makes the Dutch naval debate about capital ships look speedy. It really does. And the trouble is, the force has been deployed to Singapore, which is down here, right down here. And the thing about the Navy is they're going to try and help. And the moment the Army and the Air Force starts to fall back, they're going to push forward to try and cut off their supplies. And before you think that's a stupid idea, just remember how short of supplies the Japanese were when the Singapore actually falls. They were out of food. And even more of that, they are running short on ammunition. So you don't need to take out that many of their supply ships, that many of their store ships before they've unloaded, and they will never have enough to get there. They won't be able to do it. And think about it, if they run out of artillery ammunition and they run out of food 2-3 days earlier before they get to Singapore, well, then their pace of advance is going to be a lot slower. They're going to have to wait till they're resupplied. That's going to buy you time and allow you to stabilize things. And one of the main troubles the British have at this point is that because of the wear and tear on the personnel, as I said, charitably, we should say they are the people who are literally that far away from collapsing due to war stress. No, I do not say Force Z, Tanith. Like I've been on this before. The reason I don't say Force Z is because that sounds like Force Zod and sounds like I'm talking about something out of Superman. So I say Force Z. Because that just sounds slightly better to my mind. It doesn't sound like I'm talking about Superman. So, just bear with me, okay? On that one, that's my own peccadillo. I do admit it, but it's my own peccadillo. Okay? We're all out there our own little quirks, and that's going to be mine. It's not a hill I'm going to die on, but it's a hill I'm going to keep to because it just sounds better in my head. And so, yeah, it makes sense what to do. It makes sense to deploy it without the necessary supporting aircraft, etc. But one of the troubles you have with this scenario and this situation is it actually leads to a whole misunderstanding. You see, the air support, there's often a main discussion about the fact that the Royal Navy's told there's no air support available. And yet there are fighters standing on the airfield waiting to deploy if the Navy needs them. And the question is, why? What happens? Well, it's very simple. The Royal Navy asked the question, is there any air support available? The RAF officer in charge of it says, no. There isn't. So the Royal Navy takes it there isn't. The thing is, the RAF officer meant by air support was there's no attacking force available. Of course there's air defence fighters available. That's the problem. So, there's no supporting aircraft because they've been burned out doing reconnaissance, they've been burned out doing bombing runs. There's no attacking aircraft ready, so there's no air support available. But the reality is there were fighters available. There were fighters available. The question, there was often phrased afterwards, well, they should have asked if there was air support and fighter cover available. Then they'd been told there was no air support, but there was fighter cover. To the Navy, air support means air support. They don't care if it's attacking or fighting. They care if there's aircraft available. Then you tell them what aircraft there are, and they'll work within that. But this is the problem you have with all these tired officers. These officers, they're not thinking through. You could have had the Air Force officer could have gone, there's no air support available, but there is fighter cover. You could have a Navy go, well, does that include a Navy guy go, does that include fighters as well as bombers? Neither's asking the right answer a question, neither's giving the right answer. So this is one of the reasons why Phillips decides to go radio silent, because if he cannot call upon fighters, and he cannot call upon fighters for his air defence, if he keeps quiet and doesn't coordinate with fighters, then that gives him more of a chance of escaping on notice, of being able to hide. And considering the aircraft that attack him are on their way home from hunting for him while he's on his way back, and they hadn't known where he was, and they're literally running on fumes when they do attack him, his gamble almost pays off on that one. But it does lead to a lot of accusations between the Royal Australian Air Force, etc., and the Royal Navy over the years, because the Royal Australian Air Force fighters were there, and they both felt guilty and felt absolutely suborned that they hadn't been called up. And it's Repulse which sends a message for them. And the thing is, Repulse was sending a message with the captain not believing he was going to get any support, but he might as well on the off chance there's something out there. Perhaps there's something, anything will help him. Phillips honestly believed there was nothing available because of the phrasing of questions. And yes, this is the kind of stupid stuff which happens in war. This is why we start to have standards and standards of phrasing of questions and how you answer questions and how they're going to be put forward and how you put them in terms of command structures to stop this sort of thing happening. So you have to enunciate what is available. Is it strike aircraft? Is it tactical support aircraft you're asking for? Is it fighter defense? What are you after? This is what we have available. You can't just ask for air support. You have to ask for what kind of air support you're asking for. And yeah, remember, this is not something which hasn't happened before. We can go back to the Battle of Jutland, where they're asking for where the specific call sign of the commander of the German fleet is. And they don't ask, well, where is the commander of the German fleet? Because he changes his call sign when he leaves harbour. But they ask for the specific call sign. Of course, it's sitting in harbour, because it always is, because it's left in harbour. So yeah, Royal Navy officers are going to share. In this scenario, because it's between two different services, it causes an entire debate and people to start being recriminating each other with blame, and there's really no point. Humans gonna human. That's the ultimate point. Humans gonna human. Jonathan Moon, but what if Zod had joined Force Z instead of a carrier? If Zod is with them, then they win. It's the full branch of the US military defining. Secure building. Marines, charge in with grenades and storm it. Army sets up sandbags, interlocking fields of fire. Air Force gets a leaf, Navy lights off and lock. That's a good joke. But yet, seriously, that is some of the things we talked about. A few years ago, I had... No, actually, was it last year or something? I had someone... Because I was pointing out the torpedo spotter reconnaissance, which is the Royal Navy definition for its torpedo bombers in this period. TSR is what the Swordfish was. And someone wrote me, no, it's not. No. TSR was a post-war strategic bomber concept. It's nothing to do with the Royal Navy. I went, no. Yes, it is. It's tactical strike, No, it's torpedo spotter reconnaissance. And I had to explain them and show them and go, no, about 40 years earlier, the Royal Navy were using that phrasing to describe this, the Swordfish. And you are perfectly right about what the RAF was using as those definitions to those terms later on. But these things change. They change. And so yeah, you have all this fun going on. So, with that being said, they find themselves in a pretty nasty scenario. And as said, they go out. And when they go out, well, it doesn't go well. It doesn't go well. They find themselves under air attack. A heavy air attack. And if you're wondering when this takes place, well, it's early in December. It's really early in December. Pearl Harbor takes place on the 7th of December. These attacks take place on... And I'm going to clarify it because it's very early in the morning and I want to check. 10th of December 1941. When I check, I wasn't... Because I was going to say... I'm sure it's the 10th, but I want to clarify with my notes. 10th of December. So 3 days after Pearl Harbor. 3 days. They were spotted at 10:15 hours. As said, the Royal Navy had gone north to try and find where they thought the Japanese were. They'd gone as far north as they could. They hadn't found the Japanese, and so they were heading back to Singapore. The Japanese had actually been searching, had presumed he wouldn't come this far north, so been actually searching south. It's a really fun scenario. He's further north than the Japanese think, but heading south. The Japanese are further south and have reached further south than he thinks they can do, because he doesn't know all these bombers have arrived, because the one bomber group he knew about has been reinforced by aircraft from 2 other bomber groups. Are, coming north. And they spot him. And they start attacking. The aircraft strength is roughly 34 torpedo aircraft and 51 bombers. 88 aircraft to strike them with. 88 aircraft. Please note, they have no fighters. They have no fighters. They are the crack, probably the best anti-shipping force in the world, arguably, at this point. Fliegerkorps 10, eat your heart out. It's the Japanese every single time. These guys have been training for years in anti-shipping operations, and they're coming in with nothing to break them up. Nothing to break them up. And saying that, it's still a very close run thing whether Repulse survives. It's a very, very close run thing when Repulse survives. Prince of Wales, she's hit multiple times. As is Repulse. They're bracketed. They are attacked from multiple angles. They are in the exact worst scenario they can be in for a ship. Remember I talked about they could comb torpedoes if there's a single aircraft launching? Well, if you've got 5 dropping from this side and 5 dropping from this side, you can't comb them. You can't avoid them. Technically 4 days because it's the other side of the dateline. Okay. The point is, Singapore doesn't fall for a long time after this. Please note, when we start talking about the fall of Singapore, and I'm going to exactly check this because on my notes, it falls on the 15th of February 1942. Singapore. So, in December 1941, operating from Singapore makes sense. That's 3 months away. So yeah, yes, the Japanese are starting. Yes, they are pushing forward with their campaign. Yes, they're making their landings. And yes, the Navy, the Army and the Air Force are already starting to withdraw at this point. But it can work. I will say this, there's more damage. The aircraft involved do not get away scot-free. It is not necessarily the easiest scenario for them. Even with no fighters involved, 28 of the aircraft are damaged to the point at which they're not really reusable. They managed to make it home, but not reusable. 2 of the seaplanes are lost. That's 2 scouting aircraft are lost. 4 aircraft were destroyed by fire. And so, yeah, out of the 88 roughly aircraft that attack, and the most heavily damaged are the torpedo bombers. A lot, there's 88 aircraft involved. 36? 34 out of 88 are rendered pointless after that. So, yeah. It's not a one-way street. But it is a one-way street, because there is no ship which is designed to take on this level of attack. It's the equivalent today of, oh yeah, we have a task force out of, let's say, a couple of Arleigh Burkes, and there's been 1,000 silkworms launched at them. As good as they can do, they're not gonna. That one's just not gonna. They're not built to deal with the sheer quantity of mass. Now, with all this being said, They have the yes. Please note as well they haven't necessarily removed a lot of guns. They removed some of their guns. Dirt Squad, you are quite right. Some of the bombers had removed some of their guns to give them to allow them extra range, and to give them the range to try and find the Royal Navy, because they'd gone further south than they were planning on doing, and that was the thing. They'd gone as far south as they could to try and find the Royal Navy. Didn't realise the Royal Navy were more north. If they'd realised where the Royal Navy were, then actually they probably would have actually taken less. Taken more defensive fire, but they didn't. So they went. It's a whole funny scenario. It really is. And as bad as yes, on that one, as bad as a Silkcom was, that still would be a frigate moment. And this is the scenario. These ships, they're not. The whole thing is they weren't designed for it. They were designed. Royal Navy doctrine was you have a fleet carrier with this force. The whole reason the Royal Navy had built the fleet carriers was that they were supposed to be forward with the forces, with the battle forces as close up to the battle as possible. And they're supposed to be able to take hits and carry on working. Because the Royal Navy's theory, and they're not necessarily wrong, was it's better to have a carrier operational than have a carrier with a heavier strike but not operational. It's useful to have a slightly small number of aircraft but keep it being available than to have more aircraft as a theoretical but lose your carrier. And what was Indomitable doing this time? Well, as I've said, and I will keep saying this because it apparently needs to be importantly said, she had her accident. She'd run aground in November 1941. She was sailing at the beginning of November 1941 in Jamaica. And this delayed her deploying out to the Far East. She'd literally gone to the West Indies on a shakedown cruise, and then she was supposed to pick up her aircraft and deploy to the Far East. So what's she doing at this point? Well, will actually join the Eastern Fleet in January 1942. She's actually on her way. As I said, she is being fixed and maintained and repaired up, but she's going to be 6 weeks late in getting out there. She gets out in January 1942. She gets out there. She's one of the first carriers to arrive in the Eastern Fleet at Ceylon. And she arrives with her air group. So, at this point, this is why makes such a good alternate history to consider, and one of the reasons why I tend to use it with students quite often. You don't have to do much work to make it work out. She's not part of any other force. She's not off doing another important mission. You don't have to scrub anything else. She's literally being repaired because she ran aground on a coral reef. Great sailing there, Royal Navy. Great sailing. Life happens. It does. Now, the thing is, the really interesting thing about her is she's a bit special. Because while she's technically part of the first batch of illustrious class illustrious class aircraft carriers, she was late enough on they've modified her. So she's a halfway point between an illustrious class and an implacable. She's a halfway point between illustrious class and implacable. We don't need to make another ship run aground across in Jamaica. We really don't. But for those who need the warning because they don't like the alternate history, it's the shameless book plug time. So we're going to be getting into the alternate history from this point onwards. Okay? So thank you everyone for supporting the channel. I hope you enjoyed the channel. I'm going to also take this time to answer some of the history questions that appeared in the chat. Hopefully Restream has managed to keep all the chat questions there. And it's only been an hour, so usually it's kept it. I've answered Knights Exec everyone's questions on why Indomitable was being picked and why we're talking about her. Hi, John Shea. Hello, Leslie Mitchell. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, Mark Harkness. Hello, Michael Cooch. Hello, Stephen Meyer. Jonathan Moon. Hello, Runon. Hello, Duke of Betchingham. Hello, Lions. Hello, Chandler Chandler. Hello, Paul Amos. Hello, Peter Dawson. Let's see, let's go through and see if there's any questions here before we get into the start. P.A. Thomas, yes. Politics, applying the solutions that worked last year to today's problems. Well, you can point to them and go, they worked! That's the point. You therefore don't get blamed if it goes wrong, because you're applying a solution which worked. I think I've already pointed out, I think I've already engaged with the comment John South about the destroyer and the light cruiser, etc. in the Force. Yeah. Hello, Princess Schneider. Yuki, hello. As I mentioned, Spanish spy Velasco also knows that the Force had left the Med, so that reduces any advantage of the extra ships. Yeah. Only Tiger is better with 14-inch. Pretty much. Channel, I'm going to presume that's about the person who decides to prove my point by commenting with the speeds of ships which was faster than the officially admitted speeds. Luckily, they weren't Royal Navy ships. They were US Navy. I was literally going, yeah, this is an American-owned platform. This is Google-owned YouTube. This is not. I wouldn't be doing that if I were you, mate. But go on. Channel. If Fisher is Clarkson, who in the Admiralty equivalent is James May and Richard Hammond? Well, Winkle Brown might well be the Richard Hammond equivalent because he crashed a lot and he was rather small. But he tended to walk away from his crashes rather fine. I'm not sure who the James May equivalent is. I have to think about that for the Royal Navy. Leslie Mitchell, Yarrow Slack was just store ships in the 1920s. Mudbanks. Yeah, mudbanks are always a good place to put ships, but again, there's only so many places you can put them, and also, if you stick them in the mudbanks, can you defend them in the mudbanks? Again, they're useful assets. Do you want them to be used as target practice by the enemy bomber aircraft? That's going to just do damage to them. Hi, Dan Freeman. Prior to December 1941, where was the Hawkins class deployed? All around the world, usually doing cruiser operations in America, in North America Station, and occasionally the Far East, etc. Ethan McKenney, journey 30 minutes in, but looks like an interesting topic. Glad you did. World War II TV just had a live about the Admiral who trained the Royal Navy convoy escorts. Interesting, I'll go look that up. Lions. Personal rule of thumb is at least one cruiser per capital ship, so this task force, a minimum of 2 cruisers should be part of this task force. You're not wrong, and if you have a carrier, probably should have been about 3. And all sorts of things, but you know, Force H had established a policy of 1 cruiser, 1 capital ship, 1 carrier. And that wasn't too bad. That worked quite well. Admittedly, that cruiser was Sheffield, so let's be honest, there's always the other option, you send Shiny Chef. Charles Moore, you prefer me 50% faster? Anyway, though. Okay. I answered the one about the Zoom Boom. Hello, X3D. Hello, Ethan McKenney. Hello, Tanner Verka. And... ooh, how are you all doing? Anything about that? Anything going on? Hello, everyone. You're back. Back again. Tell a friend. Good. Higara. Hello. Boats equals good. I'm glad, Higara. Higara, wonder if we will get more carriers with this defense review. I know I'm dreaming, but it'd be cool. I'm just hoping Albion and Bulwark get their decision reversed. I think that's probably the easiest option for them to do, but that's getting into modern politics. Winkle Brown is the legend. He is. It's fun. Right then. With that being said, let's start off. So what is this scenario? Well, in this scenario, Prince of Wales runs aground, not Indomitable. So carrier plus repulse head out. Now, it's that simple. Prince of Wales runs aground probably not necessarily in Jamaica, but in the home fleet. And let's be honest, Prince of Wales is an unlucky enough ship that frankly me saying her running aground will not surprise anyone. It also doesn't really change anything. Doesn't really it just changes which ship's going. It doesn't cause too many difficulties. I'd add there are, the whole thing works quite well in terms of Prince. I had to get rid of Prince of Wales though because the question had kind of made it. And I was considering, should I do one where it's Prince of Wales, one where it's Repulse? And I went, well, it doesn't really matter to an extent, other than Repulse makes it a lot faster. If it's Repulse, the Force is actually faster than if it's Prince of Wales. But when the question is literally, was sent on 4C instead of one of the battleships, the problem is there's only one battleship. There is only one battleship. So there's only one ship I could eliminate. And so, Prince of Wales. No. No, that's not the case. Just to quickly answer Derb's question, no, that's not the case. Army and Bulwark go through regular cycles where one's in service and one's out of service. So they've never been out of maintenance. In fact, only one was in service recently, and one's just been upgraded. So honestly, yeah, it's typical British government. They've just paid to upgrade one, and now they're talking about getting rid of it. At this point, it is more likely a US battle group, a UK carrier, but we'll leave that to one side in this period. So, take care, Stafford. So, yeah, we've literally just done that. We have literally just said, okay, Prince of Wales runs aground, so Repulse carries on, and Indomitable joins up. And then we have to consider the air group. Now, this is where things get interesting and where I probably get into the most contentious decisions I'm going to make. Because there is this point, and I'm going to ignore the chat for a second while I'm getting through this, and then I'm going to go through the chat, because I imagine there's going to be quite a few questions from you. For some reason, every time I read this scenario done on the internet, they pick Indomitable's air group from August 1942. I have no idea what this obsession is with her air group from 1942. I can find her air group listing from January to April 1942, etc., and I know what her air group was. It's 800 Squadron with 12 Fulmars, 880 Squadron with 9 Sea Hurricanes, 827 Squadron with 12 Albacores, and 831 Squadron with 12 Albacores. And it's pretty darn easy to find. There are multiple variations of, and if I can find, oh, there it is, literally sitting here. I have this book. I'm going to just make this appear. Called Squadrons of the Fleet Air Arm by Ray Sturviant, which includes listings of where those squadrons were and what they were deployed on in that time period. So you can literally track down which aircraft were where and what aircraft they had. So why people keep insisting on trying to put her August 1942 air group on her in January or December 1940, in January 1942 or December 1941, I do not know. I do not know. But I've gone with the April/January air group as that's more probable for December 1941. So, the other thing you have to remember about the air group in 1942 is that it's limited by, and Sea Hurricanes do not have folding wings. Okay? So you don't want to take necessarily that many of them. You also want to consider that when this is her air group in 1942, she's sharing the aircraft pool with HMS Formidable, and they are in Ceylon, in the Indian Ocean, and they've got limited supplies at the time. She's not directly coming from the home fleet. She's not directly coming from the UK. So she's not maxed out her capacity. Because her capacity with deck parking is 65 aircraft. 45 in the hangar, 20 on deck. Now the thing is, that means there is space especially with the Sea Hurricanes not folding, it makes it, even in this scenario, they're not all getting down in the hangar. Because they're not folding their wings and there's not space for them down there. Now, deck parking is not something the Royal Navy likes to do in the Mediterranean because their aircraft are getting beaten up by enemy aircraft on the deck, but they still do it with the alert fighters. And it's not something they like to do in the North Sea or the North Atlantic because the North Sea and North Atlantic tend to try and nick their aircraft. It's annoying! But in the Indian Ocean, Pacific, especially between certain latitudes, they tend to get away with it. They tend to do it. It's part of their doctrine to do it at that point. Now, when I was looking at this and thinking about her going past this point, there is a squadron called 807 Squadron, which had between 4 and 8 full Mars. They'd taken 4 from HMS Ark Royal when she'd sunk, but they had another 4 airframes they're using in Gibraltar at this point. They'd come from Ark Royal when she had sunk, as said. And their plan was they would be rearmed with Sea Hurricanes, but in a nice way, she'd be going past, Indomitable would be going past this point, and there is a discussion. I'm not sure how serious about it. I doubt about them being put into her as well. So I've gone with that as I think that would be sensible and would fit with the Royal Navy's doctrine. That will also give them 44 aircraft on board which can be folded, which can sit away in the hangars, and 9 unfoldable Sea Hurricanes. If you've got some full Mars sitting on deck as fighter support, or maybe a couple of Albacores sitting on deck as ready scouts, alert scouts, then you've got more than enough space to be doing the maintenance you need on the necessary number of Sea Hurricanes down below it again. So it all makes sense and all works out. Also, that gives you an air group of roughly 53 aircraft. So it's not near her maximum, but it's actually equivalent to what she has quite often. She usually is operating roughly around 55 aircraft for most of the war. Her air group would consist of 20 full Mars, 9 Sea Hurricanes, 24 Albacores. 20 full Mars, 9 Sea Hurricanes, and 24 Albacores. That's roughly sensible. The Albacore at this point is the lead strike aircraft of the Royal Navy. They can take surface search radar. They can take all those systems. They're useful. Same with Hurricanes. They're useful. They can't fold their wings, but they still give you a bit of a performance kick in terms of the fighter capability. And the 20 full Mars give you plenty of reconnaissance/fighter capability. You have therefore 29 fighters and 24 strike aircraft. That's a fairly decent air group to be heading out with in December 1941. I think we can all agree that. I think we can all agree with that. Hello, Zach Fury. What's the question? Zach Fury. Fridge. Twitch has decided to shut down its thing, so I don't know if someone sent me something special on Twitch. I may or may not see it. So if you've done an emote or anything special on Twitch, a random history fact redeem. Oh, there are so many random history facts coming out in this one, but the random history fact, which is fun in this case, is that the Albacore is not just an updated version of the Swordfish. It is actually technically a new design with a new frame. But people tend to forget that. That I learned today. Oh, a random history fact I learned today. Oh, I'll deal with that at the end of the stream. I'll talk about that at the end of the stream. Because that'll fit more things. So, yeah, 20 full Mars. That's a decent enough force. And 9 Sea Hurricanes. So basically, if you were doing a standard, if we think about how you standardly organize things when you've got 18 aircraft, you'd have 4 flights of 4 and 2 spare airframes. You can do 5 flights of 4. You can keep 4 up in the air constantly with these full Mars, and 4 on the deck ready to launch as 4 alert. Because how you run carrier ops, how you run carrier air defenses, you keep 4 up in the if you, let's say you've got 18 aircraft, you'd keep 4 up in the air as cap. 4 on deck, 4 at alert status in the hangar, and 4 at a later alert status in the hangar. And then when the cap engages, you launch the alert fighters to replace the cap. You bring one set of fighters up to the deck to become the new alert, and you just keep cycling them through with the cap, with the cap that's been sent off, then returning to be rearmed, and you carry on cycling through those aircraft, and able to maintenance and pull in and pull out airframes with the spares. If you've got 20 full Mars and 9 Sea Hurricanes, you've got 29 aircraft. The odds are you do 2 Sea Hurricanes in the air at any one time, and 4 Fulmars. With 4 Fulmars, with 4 Fulmars and 2 Sea Hurricanes on, well, possibly. Please notice, you probably have 2 Hurricanes in the air, 4 Hurricanes sitting on deck, 3 Hurricanes down in the hangar being sorted out, and so you'll have maybe an alert group of 4 of the Hurricanes and 4 Fulmars ready to launch. And that's a capable force. That's a capable force for air defense. That's also a force which, let's be honest, would make absolute curtains of this attacking force. Think about this scenario we're talking about. Radar-directed fighters. Lots of them coming in. It's not nice for the the Japanese. They're going to be broken up. Then there's going to be the heavy AA. There's going to be the storm. They still might get through. There might be leakers. They might manage to get through. They might score a hit. Are they going to be able to overwhelm any ship with enough torpedoes to sink it? Probably not. There's always a chance to get the golden torpedo in, and they manage to sink in one, but it's very unlikely. Peter Dawson, no. Peter Dawson, please don't start that one. I have seen so many random myths and silly stuff, but yeah, there are people who like to bring up that one, and that's just not the case. There are ways you get the Hurricane below for maintenance. You don't want to store them below. The reason you don't store them below is not because they can't fit on the lifts. It's because they can't fold their wings, so they take up a huge amount of space in the hangar. That's the bigger trouble with them. You can get them down there. You have to be creative about how you put them on the lift, but you can get them down there. But the thing is, realistically, you don't want them down in the hangar because they'll take up so much space. There is if you want to have some fun reading some of the myths and some of the put down of it, go to Jamie Seedale's Armored Carriers page and have a look at some of the responses he's done to some of the myths about the Armored Carrier program. He has more patience than I, because my main response to quite a lot of those people who have written those histories of apparently sort of those critiques of the armored carriers is, have any of you actually ever read a primary source, visited the UK National Archives, or actually looked at anything to do with these carriers other than, I don't know what, your own thoughts and imaginations on them? Because I honestly doubt they have. I honestly doubt they have, but we'll leave that to one side. So with that as the air group, there is something else we need to discuss. Colin Cameron, basically going on a funny angle to get them down, if memory serves right. Yeah, you can't rapidly launch off the lift. You have to put them down at a funny angle, take them down, put them up. It's a nightmare, but you can do it. Now, with Prince of Wales damaged, there is also another possibility, okay? And this is a very real scenario. One of the things I often talk about Carl Dolman and the issues he has in commanding of the forces in ABDA command is the fact that he really doesn't have a ship suited to be a flagship. Well, under this scenario, and as we're sticking with it today, because of the history, and because of the question, Phillips has to be either on board Indomitable or Repulse. Now, he'll probably pick Repulse because it's got slightly more space, and slightly better set up for doing some support of flagship. But the thing is, in space-wise, it hasn't got the radios, it hasn't been updated with the latest radars, it hasn't got the things it really needs to be a task force flagship of a modern task force. That's good. Have any of you add, because I honestly doubt they have. Sorry about that. I honestly doubt they've actually read the primary sources. Is also the point I was making. Prince of Wales, if she's damaged, there is the possibility, therefore, that Renown, who when she comes out of refit in November 1941, is surged to the Far East to replace her. Literally comes out of refit in November 1941. Modernized, had latest radars, everything, because she had to have her bulges repaired. Gary Gizurkov already talked about that and already discussed those fighters as well. So yeah, that's earlier that was discussed earlier in the video. So if you want to understand about why he's not asking about those, it's an Admiral Shears location scenario, but you know it's already been discussed. I would say Dance Like a Dervish prevails, but yeah, my coach. The thing is, with Renown, it would be nice to see her deployed, but the main advantage of having her there is if you have her, Repulse, and Indomitable, they're all 30 knot plus ships, and suddenly your task force is going to be moving just that bit faster. If it wants to, it can go into the target just that quicker and just that out. They're still not ships. I don't want to have a fight with the Japanese Congos with Renown and Repulse as my only two capital ships. I really don't want to stick a fight with 4 Congos or anything like that. But they're good enough ships, they're going to cause people to think about it. Now, for Phillips, there is an honest question of which ship should he be aboard. My suspicion is it would be Repulse, but he's going to be kicking himself the entire time because he's going to be depending upon Indomitable to provide the radar. He's going to be depending on Indomitable to provide him with a lot of the wider communications. And he's going to go with Repulse because he's a destroyer officer and he wants to be on the aggressive ship that he can take towards the enemy. But realistically, yeah. There's only so many things he can do. There's only so many things he can do. And so he's going to pick Repulse, but then he's going to kick himself for it. But Indomitable can also serve as a flagship. It would be really interesting if he did, but I think he'd be on Repulse. But as said, there is a goodly scenario that if Prince of Wales is damaged and can't deploy, the other ship which is available, which would fit the Prince of Wales criteria, is Renown. And so you deploy Renown, Repulse, and Indomitable. And that's actually the question I'm going to ask in the recorded video when that comes out next Saturday. Not Saturday tomorrow, but next Saturday. That's the question for you all to think about. What changes if you're deploying those 3 as the force? Now, then we have the fighters, and as this is in the chat, I'm going to go over this again. So, Gerigi, Raptorat, people who are asking this. The person who asked the question was his senior naval officer in Singapore. He goes to the senior Air Force officer and asks if there's any air support available. He's told there is no air support available, so he sends that message to Phillips. So as far as Phillips knows, there is nothing available. The thing is, the Air Force officer meant by air support, there's no strike aircraft available, and of course there's fleet defense fighters available, the Brewster Buffaloes. But this isn't communicated. So as far as Phillips knows, he's being told by his senior officer, who he trusts back in Singapore, there's no aircraft available because the Air Force have said they're worn out. Because that's actually what they say. So he's not going to ask a second one because he's been told there's no aircraft available because they're worn out. So if Phillips has been told that, as far as he's concerned, there is no air support available. Now here's the interesting thing. Even if he's told that, if there's a carrier launching its fighters, recovering its fighters, conducting air defense operations with its fighters, that will create noise of chatter. That will create noise on the radio. Which means the Brewster Buffaloes, sitting out of the Royal Australian Air Force, sitting back in Singapore, who were assigned to support fleet defence, would go, hang on, they're in trouble, let's go, tally-ho. So you don't just have the fighters which are aboard the carrier to deal with. This could get even worse. Although I think by the time 30 minutes elapses and it's roughly 30 minutes flying time at least for these aircraft to reach where Repulse and Prince of Wales were historically, and where the Force Z would probably be in this scenario. The odds are the enemy aren't there anymore. The odds are by that point they get there, the air defense fighters are gone. We've dealt with that. Now, the other interesting thing I would add to the scenario changing is that with his own reconnaissance aircraft, the odds are he does find out where the enemy are landing as well. He might launch a strike with his bombers at night. He might try and push forward and engage them with a repulse. But yeah, Ethan McKinney, is the Royal Navy fighter control using the same frequencies as RAF fighter control? They monitor each other's frequencies. So you don't. Royal Navy fighter control is, and the fighter control is on a similar enough. They monitor each other and they work together. I don't want to get into that too much because that's an entire discussion. But 4Z is moving on. No. I did that one entirely for you, Tanaf, to see if you were still watching. Now, before Z moving in, they're in their positions they are historically, but the thing is they might actually be further north. They might be pushing themselves further north because they've got the air cover, because they've got their own fighters with them, which might make them even further away when they're hit. It also might mean that, honestly, the Japanese run into a lot of trouble with them. We've been over the whole scenario of air defense where your outer forces engaging with the fighters are breaking up. The thing is, if you've got the Hurricanes as well as the Fulmars, if you think about the first, the enemy are detected at range by the radar, they'd guide in the cap of the 6, they're launching another 6, or even 8 of the alert aircraft, and they send them off straight off after them, and then they maybe are trying to cycle up 6 more, or at least 4 more of the Fulmars. That's a problem for the enemy. Yes, you're bringing a lot of fighters, but what are the... If we go back and talk about it, right, what are the fighters going to concentrate on? Are they going to bother about high-level bombers? No. They're going to go for the torpedo bombers. Because the high-level bombers, if they're doing a high-level maneuvering, the odds of them hitting the ships are very low. They're going to break them up, they're going to do what they can, but the fighters aren't really going to bother about those. But what the thing is interesting is the Hurricanes could well go in and go, right then, so where are the torpedo bombers? So whilst the Fulmars are doing their whole zoom and boom approach and breaking up the enemy's strikes, and breaking them up and causing them confusion and breaking them up and making them use fuel and probably making them try and head home and all these things, the Hurricanes are going to be going for them. Are going to be trying to take out the torpedo bombers. There's also the scenario that the reconnaissance aircraft which spotted and tracked the force could have been engaged earlier on by the cap. They could have been wiped out, which could have caused the Japanese to have even more trouble hunting them down. It adds a lot more into this mixture. So my thing is, very much, these ships are safe. I do not think the ships Repulse and Indomitable are sunk or destroyed in this fight. I really don't. I think probably the big problem for the Japanese is that their air group gets mauled. Their heavy air group gets mauled. And that could be a problem. That could be a problem for later on in the war. What are follow-on changes? Well, Admiral Hart, US Navy, probably doesn't get command of the Sea Force in this scenario. He's technically probably the most senior admiral there, and he's definitely a very capable admiral, but with Phillips having the carrier and the capital ship, then probably forces formed up around him. And also you're going to have a different scenario because, well, suddenly, instead of you wanting to have dispersed forces to try and do guerrilla naval warfare and deny the Japanese the approach, it makes sense to concentrate. Because either something requires the presence of the naval force and requires you turn up with the carrier and the capital ship to engage it, or it doesn't. And if it does, you want to turn up with all the cruisers, all the destroyers, everything you can get your hands on. It's also probably going to be reinforced. I would not be surprised if HMS Formidable still turns up in January. I would also... How is Dixie? I would also not be surprised if... Well, what should I say? I'd not be surprised if US forces are formed up onto it more, because one of the things of, if you have enough forces there, if you have this level of force there, they're going to be capable of causing trouble. I don't think you can protect the Philippines. I think MacArthur is still going to do his usual trick with the Philippines. But there is a scenario whereby if you've got enough force operating around Singapore, you can protect Malaya and Singapore. You can certainly... we'll talk about that as we go on. And if you can project submarine forces, etc., from Singapore and really concentrate forces on Singapore, as you do historically elsewhere, but, you know, they're all brought together on Singapore, then you can make this area one large battle zone. One large absolute nightmare for them. And for the Japanese, that can mean they don't get the Dutch East Indies. That can mean they don't get into the scenarios they need to get into. Either way, it could end up with all sorts of interesting things happening. The other advantage is that Phillips has, even if he's aboard Repulse, he has the space to have Dutch and American staff officers to help make communications between these forces make more sense and work together more smoothly. Carl Dolman doesn't have that. Then these four, you know, the poor guy gets harassed for so many things that aren't his fault. Dirt Squad. No history with Dr. Alex. I think as soon as the defending fighters see that the various sectors on the bombers don't have defensive fire, it would make the Mariana Turkey shoot like a fair fight. Oh yeah, the 4 miles would be racking them up. It would be absolutely heaven for them, especially when you consider most of those 4 mile pilots are veterans of the Mediterranean. They're going to be racking it up. Radios are about as good as anyone else's for the Japanese, and so yeah, they could have the same issues, but you know, they didn't have issues there historically. So we're not gonna give them issues that they didn't have historically. I'm not gonna start messaging anything. Now, with this scenario going on, it's gonna be interesting, because if you've got a fleet and you've got Malaya secured to some extent, and if you have got these scenarios for ABDA command, then that in many ways starts to drive Japanese policy in the area, because you can't advance into Borneo if a carrier battle group can advance into the South China Sea and block your convoy routes. That's the reality. So this force is going to be important. Now, does Singapore fall? Now, this is the interesting one. I think if you've got a carrier, A, you probably do find those supply ships, but also B, you can hit them. Maybe use carrier aircraft. Maybe that's what the albacore are used for. Maybe you guide in repulse. I certainly think if you have Renown as well as Repulse, we're here in this scenario, you have enough ships which are fast enough, you can really push forward, engage, and pull back. So I think it would be interesting, but I think it would be a carrier strike. Maybe it would be a daytime, maybe it would be a night strike. Remember, the Royal Navy love a night strike. A night strike on an undefended harbour where the Japanese ships are sitting, are floating supplies. They'd love that. Albacores, again, like the good old swordfish, have the same advantage. As I pointed out before from Taranto, the Royal Navy do not fight fair. The advantage they have for their torpedoes, especially in doing shallow run attacks against ships in harbour, is not only have they, like everyone else, fitted extended fins on them and tried to make them as naturally buoyant as possible, so they come up and run shallow, but they also stick a tension wire on here, so as they drop down, that spools out, providing just enough tension to make sure the torpedoes belly flop. That's their advantage. Well, again, you have these aircraft, they come in and attack the ships. I don't expect the military force. I'm not suddenly thinking the military force are going to do a lot better than they did historically. What I'm saying is, if the Japanese run out of supplies earlier in the campaign, if they are running shorter supplies earlier, if they're in trouble earlier due to lack of artillery shells, lack of ammunition, because they lose aircraft early on, because they lose supplies early on in the campaign, we're talking back in December. Not February when Singapore falls, we're talking losing supplies back in December, January, to these strikes. Then that's a different scenario. That is a different scenario. And furthermore, if you've got this force here, an ABDA command being formed up around Singapore, you're probably going to get a whole lot of submarines being put there. And just think about the submarines which are put in Perth. Think about the submarines which are set up in Australia operating from Singapore. Think about how good a time they could have with the Japanese forces. And I'm not just talking about the ones with the American Mark 14 torpedoes. They could have an interesting time operating from Singapore. The Mark 14 torpedo still probably doesn't work, but leave that to one side. I'm talking about the British submarines, the Dutch submarines operating from Singapore. If they can maintain that, then that's going to be a great forward position for them. And your best position to defend Singapore is not when you're the poor 22nd Australian Brigade, which has been hurriedly reformed along the southern bank of the Johor Strait. No. It's when the Japanese forces are far up in Malaysia. Look at all this distance they cover from landing to final point. Look at how far they advance. They do that thanks to supplies. If they're not getting resupplied by artillery shells, if they're not getting resupplied with food, if they're not getting the supplies they need, then as good as their troops are, as much as they are famed for marching so far on just a small bag of rice, this, that, they're going to fall apart. You have limits of how far you can push people to. Yes, they might march to their deaths doing it, but they'll still be dead long before they reach Singapore. And post-war, the reputation of Fulmar will be much higher. The Fulmar, which blunted the Japanese blow on all these things, yes, the Fulmar's reputation would be a lot higher than it is historically, even though, frankly, it doesn't deserve its reputation because it did quite well in the Mediterranean. Thank you, Matthew Gris. Thank you for answering my question. Sorry if the wording could have been better. No, the wording was fine. It just meant that it was definitely going to be, in a nice way, it was always going to have to be Prince of Wales because she was the only battleship there. And without also, you have then the morale response of A, Force Z not being sunk, and B, the morale boost of the Navy attacking, and all these things can have an impact on the troops ashore. And Helfrich would have a field over subs. Yes, completely Ewok 40-40. And the other officers involved. Helfrich is the senior one who gets a lot of the credit, but there's a lot of other officers below him who are also just as involved in deploying those submarines. And frankly, it would have been powerful. It would have been a powerful scenario. So the thing is, I think it's very easy in this scenario to say, I don't think Singapore falls. If you have a carrier force there, if you have this force, it's also going to build up. So if you have this, then instead of January those ships being deployed to Ceylon and working from there, because Churchill goes just as quickly, just at the point where you need to reinforce up here to strengthen it, he's suddenly doing the opposite he was doing on it. Oh no, we have to be safe, we have to be safe, we have to preserve. He suddenly turns almost into Hitler and Mussolini going, oh no, we can't lose ships, we just lost 2. He's so shocked and horrified for it. But in this scenario, you probably do get Prince of Wales being deployed at this point. You probably do get Warspite being deployed at this point, as they did historically. In Warspite's case, you probably get Formidable being deployed at this point. So you possibly end up, especially if you got Renown earlier, you could end up with 4 fast capital ships out here, and Repulse, Renown, Warspite, and Prince of Wales. Now, Warspite, Prince of Wales aren't as fast as Renown and Repulse, and Warspite is not as fast as Renown. But those 4 sitting out there as the core of your group, along with the 4 R-class battleships, that's suddenly quite a heavy force you have sitting on Singapore in terms of capital ships. You have 8 capital ships. And if you have 2 fleet carriers and a light fleet carrier, well, that's another capable force. And the other thing is, if what happens if other vessels turn up? You're talking about the Dutch surface vessels, the American surface vessels. What happens if they turn up? And then we have the idea of the Battle of Java Sea. Well, the Battle of Java Sea traditionally is this whole scenario where you have light forces, cruisers, etc., engaging enemy cruisers. The Japanese are able to do that because there aren't any heavier forces in the area, so they might as well deploy them forward. They can do that before their heavy forces are ready. In this scenario, there are capital ships sitting here. There are aircraft carriers sitting here. You have to wait till you have your full force ready. The Battle of the Java Sea is not going to take place like it did before. Even if it does, Renown, Repulse, in this scenario definitely Repulse and Indomitable, but probably, by the time we get to the Battle of Java Sea, they're going to be reinforced by the ships which are going to the Eastern Fleet, at least, so probably at least Warspite, maybe Prince of Wales if she's been fixed, and maybe, as I said, Renown, if she'd been said earlier. Those ships all have radar. They're all able to fight quite happily at night. Yes, you've got a great 8-inch cruisers, but if you're night fighting and you're fighting with the British, you can go, well, we can dominate you at range with the sheer volume of 8-inch fire. Boom, 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 boom. By the way, that's the responding fire of 14 15-inch guns, 10 14-inch guns. HMS Enterprise, why are you firing your 6-inch guns at that range? I hit something. Okay. So, I think probably for the Japanese this becomes a very different scenario. There's also the problem of if they are trying to reinforce troop movements and this force is present. So, for the Japanese, I think what you end up with, a scenario rather like historically, you end up with Force C. With the Operation Sea Force. I think you end up with that as your scenario. And I think the force the Japanese will retain for Operation C is what eventually they will send south. The trouble is, it's the timeline working out for that. I think the timeline would be as it was historically. Because if you consider the assets used in Operation C, they're assets which were mostly deployed for things like for Pearl Harbor, etc. It takes a time to work them up and get them back into service. It takes time to make them viable again. It takes time to get them operational. All these things, all the requirements they want to do with them. Work them up their new crews, some of them. Integrate new ships into their force structure. All these things take time. And if these things take time, then that means you can't suddenly change the stuff. You can't suddenly go, yeah, I want to do this. I want to rapidly get these things into service. So I think possibly you end up with a rather similar time period. I think it's probably April, May 1941, 1942. Technically, I know it's March, April, historically, for Force C to deploy. And it could be as early as that. It could be as early as March, April. But March, April is what they do when they're on a winning level. When you know you're going to deploy down and you're possibly going to be facing land-based aircraft operating from air bases, you're going to be deploying submarine forces operating from Singapore. You're going to be facing all the other assets they have. You might well not do it as early. You're going to wait till you have maybe more forces. Now, Frank Baumann, could Singapore or Australia supply amateur guns? No. But Singapore has stockpiles, and the Royal Navy is very capable of moving large supplies of ammunition around the world. And honestly, this is going to sound terrible, but convoys going of ammunition and new gun barrels would be going around the world to supply them. Frank Baumann, they do it already to supply the Royal Navy Mediterranean Fleet. They did it to supply the Eastern Fleet historically. They do it to supply the British Pacific Fleet when it's operating. They move shells around the world. It's part of what you do. You don't need the local factories would be great, but if you don't have them, it really doesn't matter. Now, Operation C pretty much is the Kido Butai. It's 5 carriers and a light carrier sent down there. So, and the 4 Congos. Again, that's what they might send, but I would argue that sending 4 Congos with the possibility of finding themselves fighting the 2 Renowns, that's something. Fighting the 2 Renowns, Warspite and Prince of Wales, that's something similarly different. I'd also argue that the likelihood is there's at least 1 American carrier attached to the force. Might be Saratoga, there's all sorts of options for what it is, but I would not be surprised if the Americans will have dispatched at least 1 carrier to attack to join it. And the reason I say this is because for the Americans, it's going to be part of their forces which are trying to support whatever's going on with the Philippines actions, etc., and in ABDA command. And also, if you've got British carriers there, and you send an American carrier out to back them up, you suddenly have a very strong force which is going to keep the Japanese very much focused on that part of the world, rather than maybe attacking the American East Coast, American West Coast, or Hawaii again, or the Aleutians, etc. So any forces you can send to it is going to be useful in keeping the Japanese away. You might still want to conduct your raids, but I think probably Saratoga at least is with them. Maybe Yorktown, but probably Saratoga. Saratoga's the one historically which was in that region, so I think Saratoga probably. Now, if they might even have 2. And the thing is, again, that's going to cause the Japanese to probably want to do some work and some intelligence and try and find out what's going on. The stronger the force is down there, the more scary it is. It's also likely to be under British command at this point. It's likely to go under the command of Phillips, because he's going to be the commander of forces there, and they're going to be slotted into him. Now, I've been over before what I think an Anglo-American carrier battle group would do to a Japanese force. If they manage to find them and spot them coming early enough so they had the information, the British launch a night strike, the Americans launch a dawn strike, the Japanese force are tracked by British air surface radar aircraft, and probably they're decimated. Okay? That's historically what I've always pointed out. If the Japanese find them first, the Japanese launch their strike, and who knows what happens. But with British fighter defense, and especially at this point of the war, that's going to be quite an advantage to the forces, and with the Americans integrating probably within that, as they did historically when Victorious worked with Saratoga, when she was pretending to be USS Robin. You probably have a scenario coming by where the American fighters are being very, very well controlled and very well coordinated, because whilst the Americans have a good doctrine coming up, the British have how do I put this? The Americans have a good doctrine in their minds, which they're developing, and which they're going to use experience to refine and make even better. The British have a good doctrine which has gone through the Mediterranean and they found out which bits of it work and which bits of it don't work. Now, with this scenario, full miles versus zeros, the thing is, it's going to be different. It's possibly different by this point, but again, full miles versus zeros. If they're doing that fight, I doubt they're going to, because as full miles versus ME-109s, full miles versus all the fighters they face in the Mediterranean, the full miles have a habit of doing this. They use their weight and their size to dive past the fighters and attack the bombers. They are trained to ignore them, and they do. They avoid them. And let's be honest, the fighters might try and chase them. They probably will do. But even then, it's going to be an interesting scenario. But probably the fighters, the Zeros, will find themselves facing things like Hurricanes, Hellcats, or Martlets, as they were called in British scenario by the time it happens, and other options. So that's the reality of what you find them, what they're going to be facing versus what they're going to be doing. The full miles are very much the thing you'd find in December 1941. I'm thinking by about April 1942, you would have different aircraft. But yeah, the full miles not also, how do I put this, got some other advantages in terms of their maintenance of how they work and the cap scenario, and the way the fighter controls work. So it's gonna sound strange, but I think yeah, I think you'd probably be surprised about how well the Fulmars might do in this scenario. Especially because early on in the war, how many zeros are they going to face short of when they're facing the full enemy carrier forces? That's going to be an interesting question. Okay. Is it time for your next pill? Not yet. A little bit longer. Sorry, ear infection on Poodle. Poodle's not too happy on his ear infection. I think Albacore's doing night strikes. I think also Fulmar's probably doing their reconnaissance role are going to be pretty darn useful in this scenario. So Fulmar's doing that, and Albacore's doing, well, their whole night strike asset. That's going to be a useful scenario. The British very much are going to probably be focusing on doing night attacks and air defense in the day. The Americans will be taking the lead in the day strikes. And yeah, as I said, I'm fairly certain that as long as the Allies detect the Japanese coming and don't get caught surprised, they're going to have the advantage because of the way those two forces play out together and work together. If they don't, then it's probably going to be go badly. It's probably going to go badly. But, yeah. These things, this is about as far forward as you can go in this scenario because you've changed things that much. You've changed things to the point to which, for the Japanese, trying to... It's gone back. Trying to get control of all of this is going to require them to eliminate the fleet operating there from here. And that's gonna change things as it adds up. It's going to be a cumulative impact, as it always is in these scenarios. Water brought us. Please go have a look at the whole video. That's what the whole video has been about, and yeah. You want to go garden, do you? I'll be back in a second. Poodle wants to go garden. Hello. Poodle going garden. Okay? You had a good time? Oh, that's really good. Poor fluffy beast. I'll get you some bickies. Have you got your food? How's your dinner looking? Is that bowl still full? I'll top it up a bit before I start again. And answer questions. Right. So, with that being said, here's the summary. And here's where we open the thing to the questions, and I go, well, about another half hour of questions we'll take in discussions of this. So, this is all predicated on, of course, Indomitable doing what she's supposed to do, having the air group she was supposed to have, and not having the damage off Jamaica of running aground on Coral. But there are so many options which could change this event. You know, as I said, if Courageous and Glorious hadn't been lost early in the war, if Ark Royal hadn't been lost, you know, you have any other carrier available, the Royal Navy are not deploying this force without a carrier. Even Churchill's agreement. The difference between Churchill and the Admirals was the Admirals didn't want to deploy the force to Singapore because it didn't have a carrier with it. Churchill thought, well, you know, I'll still deploy them because it will work. He believed it would still be enough as a deterrent. And that really is the problem, because you have the imagery of deterrence versus the reality of deterrence. And the imagery was that the... Do I happen to know Dr. James Smith? Yeah, Drac, I do. I know James. I've worked with him a lot over the years. He's a good guy. Bit nuts, but good guy. I think even he'd admit that one. But yeah, if you've got a carry out there, if you've got the force out there, it changes the history. It changes the events. As I said, the air attack doesn't work. The Japanese just get massacred, as we all know. We all can agree. Unescorted bombers hitting an air group which actually has hitting a battle group which actually has a carrier of it, conducting decent, even half decent air defense, let alone decent air defense for its time period, it's going to massacre them. And these aren't bombers which can leave. Oh, what are you trying to dig out? You're spreading mess all over the place, so I'd like to know what this is all about. Poodles being poodles. You are sure a biscuit is here? If I get all this out and there is no biscuit, I will not be happy with you, Poodle. There is your biscuit. There you go. Next time in future, please do not drop your biscuit behind all the bags and all the shoes. Hey, Poodles. Now, yeah, there are so many silly losses in the war. And this is the point about war in terms of long wars. There are a lot of decisions you're going to be forced to do, and this deployment without a carrier is one of them, where you're doing it because of decisions you've made earlier on. I'm always trying to make this point about long wars and about any war. They're cumulative. Decisions you've made early on will have an impact, a bigger impact later on. So seemingly small decisions, seemingly small sacrifices, small losses will have a bigger impact later on. They'll have an impact. They'll grow things. And one of the interesting things is here is you could say, well, Indomitable isn't affected by the carrier decision because she was coming into service and she should have been in service if she hadn't been run aground. And if she hadn't run aground, that's great. But that's because of the pause in carrier construction. If we think about it, if they hadn't been paused, then the carriers coming into service, instead of Indomitable, would probably have been Implacable and Indefatigable. Indomitable, Victorious, Formidable, Illustrious would all have been in service for ages. So if they are in service earlier, then probably Ark Royal isn't as worn out as she is historically. And so she might have been better maintained and might not have been lost and so on. There's so many different of these things, decisions which build up. It's attritional. So yeah. Anyway. Questions? Any questions? Fair. I'm having a bit of an argument with him over Admiral King at the moment. Oh, yeah. Don't worry. Enjoy the argument. And he will probably... James is a really nice guy. He doesn't tend to take things personally. He tends to be quite good at having these arguments, but he is also often somewhere and who, if he's got a firm opinion on something, it takes a lot to change his mind on it, which can be very good in some ways, but because it means he does persist with research as fully as he can. He is a bit of a specialist, I would argue, in Pentagon and Ministry of Defense histories and politics and the admirals involved. So he's really good on that stuff. So do pick his brains as much as you can on them as well. So there you go. He's making sure I exercise. He's certainly doing something. He's a poodle. He's certainly doing something. Charles Miller, the British often have ships named for their defeats. Half the ships, the battles they captured off the French are named for British defeats, and then the British would then use them. The Royal Navy's perfectly happy to use ships. It's like also one of the reasons why the Royal Navy has so many ships in their history which are named for, French kings. But also, you have to remember, most of those defeats you're talking about were army defeats. So, again, the Royal Navy, whilst they will literally go into fire to save the British Army, they will literally do things like Creek, Dunkirk, all this stuff to say, being able to twist their tails by having a ship named for a battle where the British Army lost, that would be worth so many pints. That would be so much hedonism of fun. For want of a nail, yes, Ewok 40. That is pretty much it, for want of a nail. Ewok 40. I think USN carriers had the same scenario versus Bettys a few times with massacres. Yeah. If you have unescorted Bettys coming in to attack your carrier group, your fighters can really dominate them. Now, there was someone already who brought it up before I was going to bring it up, and I was going to bring it up at this point, is the whole full Mars versus Zeros thing. But again, if we look at the performance of full Mars versus some Macchies, some ME-109s, the fighters that you have in the Mediterranean theatre from the Axis forces, they don't do too bad. They mainly do a dodge, focusing on the strike aircraft, focusing on the things that can actually hurt their carriers and hurt their ships. But yeah, they don't do too bad. They do get some kills, some of them, mostly because of the fact of the advantages of the radar fighter direction, which allows them to be guided in position so they can do the perfect attack. That's usually the whole thing is, we guide them into a position where they can launch their strike from. They're a cap. They're already airborne. They're already up at high altitude. They're going to come down. And that's the level of fighter control which the Royal Navy have managed to achieve. And Indomitable has actually got a pretty good group. She's got some pretty good officers aboard who've got some good experience and have been well trained. So yeah. You, my friend, look like you need a bath. Yeah. Tony Villica, between Norway and Singapore, which has the greater number of missed opportunities? Oh. Probably Norway. Because Norway's would have been cumulative for the rest of the war. If you take advantage of the opportunities in Norway and you actually succeed and get it work out, you change the entire course of World War II dramatically. There is a scenario where someone's run through with me, where they reckon it would actually turn into two different wars, because it would shorten the European war that much that the Japanese war wouldn't be able to take advantage of it, and so you would have two wars. You'd have a war in Europe and a war in the Far East. Charles, just like USN is now shy about the reuse of the name William D. Porter, a key officer for but the bad of the Fletcher is bad. Yeah. It's life. I don't think the US is necessarily shy of those people. It's just the US Navy now seems a policy that almost everyone who's done anything of note deserves a destroyer named after them, and so they're all getting a destroyer named after them. I think if they started having a status escort again, not just the Arleigh-Burkes, but it had something of a cruiser level, etc. building, I think you might see some of their great admirals come out, because I think that would be a sensible option for them. But there again, everything usually has to have a state or a president for it to get built, or at least the senior politician. Um, Lions. The Royal Navy likes to look after its little brother services. It acts like the good big Royal. Yeah, we'll go with that. They're acting like the senior service. Let's see, if foreseeing a Z includes an aircraft carrier, do the Japanese attack, or will they wait until fighter cover is available? The thing is, I think they attack. Really think they do. The sensible thing would be to wait till they have fighter cover available, but that's not going to be in range for a long time and not going to be available. So they are probably the Rangers we're talking about. So they are probably going to attack, hoping that their mass is enough. And also, you have to remember, the Japanese forces are trained to be as aggressive as the Royal Navy destroyer crews. They really are. Yes, I have a poodle in my lap here, doing my best Dr. Evil here with a fluffy on my lap, patting them away. They are trained to be just as aggressive. They're going to go in for the kill. They're going to go and try and get it. They've got a capital ship. They've got a carrier. They've got destroyers in their sights. They are going to go for them. They're going to try and overwhelm them. Michael should be careful. Oh, yeah. I have a bathing cap for him. I tend to use a shower as well and make sure I can control it, but yeah, I think he does need a bit of a wash. Also, I have to say there is another option of that. His groomers down here are very nice, and if I want him to just be washed, they charge 30 quid to just bathe him rather than just rather than cut him as well. I don't think he needs to be cut, just bathed. So I might try and find that. Dracula, also the bombers in the historic attack were bingo fuel and have been airborne for hours. Fighters would either have gone home or been exhausted. Yeah, by that point, there's going to be no fighter. There's going to be no fighters at them with them. And honestly, this is what adds to the whole scenario where even the Fulmars, with them having removed guns and being a bingo fuel, the Fulmars would have been even having a fun time going, "Oh, this is a Mariners turkey shoot." So Ewok 4040. So assuming Japanese are stopped short of Dutch East Indies oil, they are defeated by mid 42 because of lack of fuel? Honestly, probably not. But there is a scenario where it's 1943 1943 where their war ends. Because if they don't get Dutch East Indies oil, and they don't get the oil supplies they find in Malaya from the British, and especially the stockpiles at Singapore, etc., that is going to have a big impact on their operations in that area. They've still got their stockpiles back at home, and they're the Japanese. They're not going to back out of the war any quicker than they can be forced to. But they are possibly going to be stopped short, and they're going to be into the withdrawal phase of the war, where they are reducing their forces a lot earlier. So instead of there being 42 being a year of rampant expansion, 42 basically starts to be 43, and then it's 44, it's in 43, and that sort of so often. Yeah. You are an absolute. Yeah, you are. Ewok 40. At Norway, you could ruin German iron ore supply and destroy surface Kriegsmarine even more than in our timeline. You could do. You could have deployed. If you hadn't lost courageous in anti-submarine warfare operations, and you therefore had more carriers around, and you found Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, you could have. There are so many options for Norway where, frankly, the Germans could lose their battleships, they could lose all their destroyers, pretty much all their crews in the operation, and the British end up with operating bases operating out of air bases in Norway, and flying across the North Sea from there and back, which affects German submarine operations, affects their surface ship operations, basically makes it impossible. And probably makes Hitler abandon the surface navy even earlier than he did historically. And if you've got large aircraft, you've got aircraft patrolling over the North Sea from the UK to Norway and back, refueling on either side with their surface search radar, then that means the submarines have to try and get through the North Sea underwater. And that's a long way to go! It is a long way to go. Oh. Yeah, I love the way you do that and then you demand treats for it. That's just... There is something wrong in our relationship here. There is something wrong in the puppy-papa relationship going on here. Yeah, I will give you a bicky, and you have a bit of a rest. Oh, caramba. Oh. Thank you, Ibex. And, you know, it's also you get the, you know, you can make sure you get the Swedish iron ore, you can all sorts of things you can do if you stop the Germans getting Norway. Charles Muir. Blowfield Evil had a small pet, lost animal, can eat even a few bites. Yeah, you can say that again. Would they pick up the pilots if they went down either side? The Royal Navy would be picking up pilots quite happily. I'm not sure about the Japanese. They don't seem to have much in the way of fighter recovery program. Hi, Tim O'Neill. Colin Cameron, if there is no Dutch East Indies oil, that means Yamato Act don't leave the home islands. Probably. In which case, the Japanese forces are forced in a lot more. And also, if we go back to this scenario, if you're operating submarines out of Singapore, think about that from a naval basing perspective. You can, even if the Japanese have taken over the Philippines, if you're operating submarines out of Singapore, then the Philippines is going to be very quickly be starved of any support. And there is even a possibility that if you manage to do well enough in this area and you've got the carrier forces, you could possibly run convoys through to China on in ship form. That's going to be a very much further on in the war scenario, but that, you know, there is that option there. Would the aircraft carrier survival change the outcome of Ark Royal? If Glorious and Courageous have both survived, then there's two more strike carriers to fill in for Ark Royal. And yes, they're not as good as Ark Royal, but they're good enough that they are probably going to be available to sort things out. Plus, there's the fact that at least one of them is probably involved in Taranto, which increases the number of aircraft you have at Taranto, possibly to 3 carriers, because as I said before, if you have 2 carriers, you're taking both out. If you have 3 carriers, you might leave one behind, so Eagle might get fixed earlier, in which case you could have 3 carriers for the Taranto operation. And as we talked out before, if you have 3 carriers and you basically double to triple the number of swordfish involved in the Taranto strike, then whilst the Giglio Cesare does survive, probably still intact, the other ships get damaged a lot more, and then the Italian Navy really is knocked out, and that has other cumulative impacts. So again, war is cumulative. The more you have surviving for these key operations, the more you can actually, you know, will have available for later operations. Like us, the Walrus usually can land on water, pick up a pilot, then land on a carrier. Yeah, thanks, Drakenfell, for that. And then return to base, back on the carrier capital ship they came from. They do often that. In fact, later on in the war, the Walruses, they're usually operating 1 or 2 of them from each carrier as their basically search and rescue recovery aircraft. And they are landing back on the carrier. Often it's interesting when the Walruses are landing back on the carrier, there's a debate as to whether or not they use the arrestor cables or whether they just land on the carrier. Colin Cameron, U-boats underwater traversing North Sea would seriously cut down their endurance and food and water alone. Yes. It would cut down their supplies massively. and it would take a lot longer to traverse it, which would change the Battle Atlantic. It would change the Mid-Atlantic gap and make the area of decisive confrontation far less. And also, you probably don't need to do the operations in Iceland. If you've secured Norway, you don't need to go and do the stuff in Iceland, so you don't need to send troops and ships up there. You don't need to do the stuff you do elsewhere. You can probably get away without it. You still might want to go to Iceland because of operating aircraft from there. But possibly what you might do is send a free Danish Navy vessel there to do the job. There are lots of people saying you still can't sing. No, there's no way. I have. You have to know that there are times when I literally just stick that on and run it as as an actual exercise. And the only times we managed to thank Gideon Cheshire is when you take Ark Royal along and you take some Blackburn skewers along. If you are trying to do it torpedo bombers, you are not taking out the Cheshire. If you've got some skewers in their dive bomber role, you can take out the Cheshire. But they literally all have to focus on her. It's literally that. Hello, you. I thought they're sinking course. They're sinking, yes, there was, in terms of the losses involved in the losses of the experienced personnel in terms of damage control personnel aboard them did have an impact on the personnel who were available later in war for carriers, did have an impact on the Ark Royal in that regard as well. But there's also the fact, as I mentioned before, maintenance and things which she, with her loss, it is partially due to damage control. It's partially also due to the fact that she really needed a good dry docking and refit, and she hadn't been able to have one. And that is part of the equation. Jamie Seedle has persuaded me to an extent on that front. And so, yeah, I think also if you have them around. But as said, if the Italian fleet has lost more at Taranto, then that's going to change operations in the Mediterranean. That could have changed the North African campaign. And that's all going to have impacts. It's a cumulative change. This is what happens when we change these scenarios. And I would say there is the chance that the Japanese go, okay, there's a British carrier down there, it's done this, we're going to deploy what carriers we have available in a quick force to try and go neutralize it. That is a scenario which could happen. But again, if the British if they've already caused if the Royal Navy's already caused the trouble, then there's always a chance that Force Z, once being reinforced, could withdraw back the other side of Singapore. So the Japanese carriers can't find it. I doubt they do, though, because the way the Japanese operate with their carriers, they tend to like to send a strong force if they think there's an enemy. They want to send overwhelming force to annihilate the enemy. They don't want to send just enough. And I know that's strange when we talk about the Aleutians as well, because they send just enough for that, but that's a diversion, not a primary strike. Minus, my mind couldn't think of how to express the thought in a cousin-appropriate fashion. You did well. Colin Cameron, if you have an earlier outer for Japan and or Italy, then our Royal Navy ships would not be driven so hard, so they have a longer life and you may not have the late war designs built and used post-war like the Darings. Honestly, I think you still get the Darings. I think the Darings are a natural outcome of the war, but I think possibly you get them instead of as many of the battles. I think that's one of the things. The battles are the war emergency design. The Darings are these are the new fleet destroyers, successors to the tribal design. Ibex, then there's going to be a different arrangement. Probably, again, that's going to involve Denmark to get that. Are you chewing your bed again? Stop chewing your bed. Stop it. You've got actual toys to chew. Why chew your bed? I know, your ear's hurting you, but chewing bed doesn't help. Good boy. How protect the rights of Prince of Wales and repulse from illegal salvage? They've been decimated by it, as far as we know. Honestly, as far as I've seen from the reports I've seen on these things, like Exeter, those wrecks, like other wrecks in the region, are being decimated by illegal salvage. So, yeah. What, Boris, you're saying about as protected as your house? I wouldn't say they're as protected as anyone's house. As anyone's house. I think you're being too generous. It's just not. Sharks with lasers would be fun, but you know, it's trying to make sure the sharks don't turn killer whale and don't decide to start attacking humans. That's the problem. Shumo, what was the Japanese intelligence of the RN's full structure for Force C? If there was a carrier present, wouldn't the IJM bombers be fully defensively equipped? They don't have. They have intelligence about the Royal Navy forces being deployed. The reason they weren't fully defensively equipped was because they were operating at maximum range. So it wasn't that they didn't want to have, and they were expecting to encounter fighters from Singapore in their area. So they were expecting fighters. The thing they're expecting the fighters to be in their fuel range as well. The reason they're not carrying the defensive weapons is because they're going for maximum range to strike at the longest range. So they're reducing their weight. Saying that, they might go for a shorter range tact and actually have the defensive weapons, but that's really not going to help them that much. They're still going to be well out of fighter range if they have it, and they're still going to run into the trouble. Leave. Okay, I'm taking a better way now, because... No, and no, you're not getting your bed back. Oi, dogs. Now I'm going to have a sewing job. I will show this to everyone. No, you're not going to hide it from them. They're going to see. This is what the poodle's done. I'm going to have a sewing job later on. Yes, me, sewing. That's what I'll be doing while chatting to everyone on Discord server. I'll be sewing. Oh, he's got squeaky tennis balls. The reason he's had it taken off him is because he kept squeaking while I was live. He's not allowed them while I'm live. Because otherwise all you would hear, and I'm going to say this, everyone cover your ears, okay? Cover your ears. The squeaker in this one's gone. For future reference. Shh. Yes, I sew. Yes, I can patch up clothes and things. Why? Surely that's something with being an adult. You should know how to look after your own socks and clothes and mend them when you can. That's just normal for being a fully functional adult, isn't it? Would that make Royal Navy ships more possible? I don't know on that one. Honestly, I think if there is a battle in the Far East between the Congos and a Royal Navy force, instead of, you know, Renowned, Repulse, Warspite, and Prince of Wales, and there's a chance Warspite gets saved if she takes part in the last big what's called the battleship battle of World War II, etc. There's a part that she might survive, but we can always dream on that one. That's basically, that's probably the entire reason Drax's been watching this video, is to hear there's a possibility that Warspite would survive if she was part of that battle. I won't forget the random history fact I learned today. The police drive down the street once a year. I wish. Like, also, HMS bombers might have had not that many defensive guns in the first place. No armor at all, no self-seeing tanks. So, yeah, doesn't really help them much. You're honest. So remember, G3Ms and G4Ms weren't especially heavy armed to start with. Yeah. John South, biggest advantage for the UK of this is keeping Malaya. They keep the rubber and tin, which was keeping the UK profitable. It was the only with their loss that the debt started amount. That would be helpful. That would be helpful. Yeah, it was very useful for supporting the war effort and very useful for keeping the pound afloat, especially, and helping with that finances. And of course, if HMS Warspite did survive today, you'd all know who the Ryan of Warspite would be. It would be Drakenfell. They would be able to remove. It's kind of like Ryan and New Jersey. You'd be able to remove Drak from Warspite only over your cold dead body. Take care, Drak. Now, random fact, interesting fact I learned today. It's not so much a fact I've learned today, but it's one when preparing this and going through this. Once again, I'm surprised at how big a difference there is between the Fulmars, of the historical view of the Fulmar and its actual performance. Okay? No, I'm not saying I want to go toe-to-toe with a Zero in a Fulmar. I do not fancy dying that way. There's no way I can out-turn them, and there's no way I can out-zoom them. But the thing is, when we start looking through the Fulmar's war performance record and some of the fighters it does go up on a regular basis against, it really does do quite well. The big problem the Fulmar has is that it's basically built, put into service, and forgotten. As far as Fairy and the Air Ministry especially is concerned. And this is why when the Firefly comes along and people go, oh, that's a Fulmar. It's not an improved Fulmar. It's a completely different airframe. But when you look at the performance of the Firefly and how well it does and how well it's still doing in the Korean War, which is firmly into the jet era, you sit there and go, well, hang on, why wasn't the Fulmar being improved? Why wasn't the Fulmar? And that's the big trouble. The Fulmar just wasn't invested in like it should have been. If it had had engine upgrades, if it had had 20mm cannon put in instead, and other things, it would have been a really useful. It would have been able to keep up and been useful. Black Horse, Swordfish versus Zero. I think the Swordfish would probably have employed the same trick they did against a lot of fast fighters. I.e., our slowest flying speed is slower than your stalling speed. Good luck. The Swordfish accounted for many an enemy fighter by causing it to stall. And there was an ME-109 over... was it an ME-109? I think it was an ME-109 over Norway, which claimed to be shot down by a Spitfire, and the only aircraft in the area is a Fairy Swordfish. And you sit there and go, yeah. The Fulmars were useful. And what struck me as well was so much came down to how they were used with fighter control. If you position the aircraft correctly, if you're able to launch the correct strike, you can achieve a lot more. And it's one of the things of, yes, if they had better fighters, they could do even better. But the fact is they're doing very well with the fighters they have because of the level of control they're exercising over them, because of how the fighter control is working. And that's really the big advantage Indomitable brings. I cannot overstate this. The big advantage she brings is the level of fighter control she would bring to the naval force out there. The level of fighter control. That would make a massive difference to the operations. Because fighter direction control, especially as the Royal Navy's practicing it, is getting very good at this point, and will just get better throughout the war. It's been well-versed, well-trained, and hardened in the Mediterranean. It doesn't always get everything right. I'm not saying it's perfect. But the Royal Navy's been through enough operations in the Mediterranean by 1941, by December 1941, by January 1942, that they've learnt what works of their doctrine, they've learnt what doesn't work of their doctrine, and they've managed to improve the bits they need to make it all work as best as they can get it to work. And that's ultimately their useful scenario for the Fulmar. You know, the Fulmar's able to achieve a lot of what it is. And remember, there are people who make ace in the Fulmar. There are people who make ace. And go and look up their kills. They're not all slow lumbering bombers. Some of those aces make aces the hard way. Some of them get a surprisingly high tally of enemy fighter kills. So yeah, I also think the advantage the Indomitable brings is the reconnaissance capability of the Albacores and the Fulmars. Their reconnaissance role. I think that enables Phillips to be far more successful. I think it also enables him to maybe operate further out at sea, which is going to possibly make the strike even less likely to find him. Because if he's operating from further out to sea, if he's further into the South China Sea, it's going to be a lot harder for them to track him. It's going to be a lot harder, less likely for them to find him. And it comes back with Malaya. It really does come back to those supply ships. The Rari Air Force unable to engage them. If you can engage them and take them out before they're offloaded, and you lose artillery ammunition, you lose other ammunition, and you lose food, as good as the Japanese soldiers are at jungle warfare and operating on minimal support, you still need some support. And whilst I think they could possibly still make a run for it down the Malay Peninsula, I think they stop well short of Singapore, and I think for them that's a problem. And if they carry on not getting any supplies, they're going to get forced back. Because again, you can't fight with nothing. And if you're able to bring up troops and supplies through Singapore, reinforce, just think about, the American troops who could be deployed there, etc. All the things that could come in, especially if they're evacuating from the Philippines, and yeah, they probably still evacuate through Indonesia, through Borneo, those areas. But, US troops, US Marines might get deployed, all sorts of things. The British will probably deploying troops from India, etc. And if the Japanese are fighting in the Malay Peninsula, then they're not able to really turn on Burma and start fighting up that way. And if you're able to move troops forces that way, the Japanese could get caught in a pincer on the land. Now, yes, this is all alternate history. This is all a discussion of what could have been, but it's interesting scenario to me is what could change just based on HMS Indomitable not running aground on some coral being available. Because whilst it's always good to have a good fighter aircraft, and you're going to fight carrier battles the way the Americans and Japanese fight the Midway Coral Sea, I don't think a Fulmar is necessarily a good aircraft for that. I wouldn't say that, claim that one. But if you're fighting this kind of battle, a battle where you've got land-based bomber aircraft coming to attack your group, Fulmar's perfectly good, capable of that. If you are fighting a night attack and launching a night strike, Fulmar's perfectly capable of supporting that. As I've said before, the reason why they don't take the Fulmars with them at Taranto is literally because they're down to one carrier and they've only got one load of air defense. The moment you go into cumulative, you have a multi-carrier operation for Taranto, and especially once you get to the 3 carrier mark, suddenly you have Fulmars coming along. And what are the Fulmars doing? They're dropping flares. So the Swordfish, instead of you having to have Swordfish aircraft assigned to dropping flares, you can have more assigned to dropping bombs and dropping torpedoes. It's all cumulative. It all has an impact. So this is the important things to think about when we're studying history. Sometimes very small events can have massive impacts. And for me, this shows the impact of not just the running aground, but it takes it all the way back to that pausing of carrier construction. It takes it all the way back to decisions at the beginning of the war. It does take it all the way back. So, with that being said, right, what have we got coming up? Next week we have John Jervis, the Earl of Vincent, permanently angry. Rather interesting to bring up Admiral King this evening when we're talking about Jervis soon. It's always fun to talk about him. He's going to be Tuesday's video, which will probably be a premiere, and I haven't yet announced what the lineup for March is going to be. That's because I have an idea, but I'm not sure if it's going to work out. If it does work out, it'll be great. March is, of course, the month of the year where I complete another circumference of the sun. So that's going to be interesting. But more importantly, this is also the part of the year where we complete another circumference on the channel. If I remember correctly, I have it already scheduled for the 5-year anniversary stream is scheduled for the 30th of March. I'm looking forward to that with all of you. I hope you're looking forward to that. That's going to be on Sunday the 30th of March. Should be good. Should be very good. And that's going to be instead of brew ships that week, as it's the 5-year anniversary one. But I might well invite people on like a normal brew ships for the presentation, for the chat, and the discussion afterwards. So it'll be there'll be a presentation, there'll be a discussion, there'll be things. It's got the 5-year anniversary of the channel, and we'll see what we've done by then and how well we've done. So that's all coming up. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and yeah, I'm going to be on the Discord server in a bit. I will sort someone else out before I go to turn up on the Discord server, because I think someone deserves. Well, more importantly, he needs his pain meds, because it's now 10 o'clock, so I've got to give him his pain meds. And then I'll be on the Discord server, and I'll be chatting away with people on Discord. So thank you very much for being here. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you everyone for taking part. I said thank you during the Shames book plug, but is there anyone I missed? Well, thanks Drac for chatting away. Thanks Lions, Colin Cameron. I'm sure there was some Black Horse, Steve Clarke, because I'm not sure Abex. There's a couple of others. I'm sure I've missed someone. Charles, I'm sure I said hello. Ewok, thank you again for everything. And Walter Brados, thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed it. And Mike Kelly, thank you for being here. I don't know if I've seen you chat that often before, but thank you very much for being here and chatting away. Thank you everyone for taking part, and hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. Toodles.